This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 333 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about overtourism. Before we begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the Oaxaca people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast. And in fact, this area is a really interesting place to consider when we talk about overtourism, because really we have never suffered from it here, and I hope we don't. So here in Western Australia, we're lucky in this respect to be very distant from most parts of the world, and I'm fairly sure that for this reason alone we have remained safe from the impacts of overtourism, because I am sure we definitely have the natural beauty that would suffer or certainly be privy to many tourists if we were more easily accessible. In fact, I actually remember when I walked the Cape to Cape track in the southwest of Western Australia with my friend Catherine, and I said to her as we walked at one stage, if we could transpose that strip of coast over to Italy or somewhere, kind of more central in the world, it would have been overrun and overdeveloped years ago, decades ago. But we were there here in Western Australia, walking for hours and often seeing nobody else along pretty undisturbed natural coastline, and seriously some of the very best views on the planet. So it's interesting. However, obviously overtourism has been in the headlines a lot more in the past few years. I think it really started to make its mark. You might remember during the first year of the pandemic, when the lack of tourists, especially in really over-touristed places, made a big difference. So suddenly having no visitors, nobody there, made it really clear to people what the negative impacts of tourism had been for a long time. The sky, the water were all cleaner and clearer, wildlife came back in abundance, lots of, all sorts of lovely consequences. However, that I think was in most of these places closely followed by revenge tourism. I really don't like revenge tourism, but it seemed to be really strong post-pandemic. It was that kind of see it now in case we never can see it approach. Basically a pretty selfish, kind of self-centered approach, like I deserve to travel and I'm going to see these places now just in case I can't. What if another pandemic happens or something else? So not great, but overtourism seems to be getting more, I don't want to say positive headlines, but more people seem to be thinking about it and paying attention to it. I literally just typed the word overtourism into the news search on Google. And even within the last few days, as I speak, there have been newspaper articles published, like numerous published about overtourism. For example, in Bali, where too many tourists are leading to a bunch of waste and rubbish issues, or overtourism in parts of Japan. They talked about an onsen town where they're now starting to limit entry numbers, that the hotel taxes in Kyoto were being increased, etc. And a bunch of topics from European over-touristed spots as well. And that was just stories from this week. And if you keep reading, there's dozens or probably hundreds of different measures that over-touristed places have implemented in the past 2 or 3 years. And I am starting to hear tourists say, hey, maybe we should go somewhere else because this is no fun. So today I have 3 guests talking about this, I think, very important topic. My first guest is Dylan Turris of Atlas Obscura. And I guess by its very nature, Dylan's site and podcast, Atlas Obscura, is the opposite of over-tourism, because a place that's obscure is, I guess, by definition, not an over-touristed place, or it wouldn't be obscure anymore. So consequently, Dylan had a lot to say on this topic of over-tourism.
I feel like for the last 10 years, people have known it's been happening. And I think what's changed is there's a lot more active intervention. It's like, look, now you got to pay money to be in this city during this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come at a different time of year, come during a low tourist season. And like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you don't have to pay and it's usually like $12 or something. It's like such a small amount of money that like, anyway, so but I always pair, because of what we do at Atlas Obscura, I always pair overtourism with its less famous, but I think no less real cousin, which is undertourism. And I guess I'll explain what I mean by this, which is like, in Venice during high season, 60,000 people come per day. And Venice has a population of 55,000 residents. There are more, and it's awful.
It's horrific sounding, doesn't it?
And it's such a bummer for the tourists too. Like, I mean, it's like everyone is having a bad time. Like the residents are unhappy, the travelers are miserable. Yeah, they're like doing the bucket list, and it's just like the worst possible experience. Yeah. And then 20 miles out of town, there is probably some unbelievable place, whether it's a museum or a vineyard or whatever it is, that is dying for more attention. Yeah. And so I see this like even within cities, like this is an example. This is in Florence. There's the Uffizi, very, very famous art museum, Venus on a half shells there. There's always like a 3-hour line outside. And it's mostly tourists who like, they know it's a thing they should do.
Yeah.
I'm not positive that most of the people in line know quite what they want from that experience, but like that's
don't want to miss out.
Don't miss out. And then like a 10-minute walk over the Ponte Vecchio, up a little bit into a slightly more residential neighborhood, I guess, is this museum called La Specola, which is one of these collections of wax anatomical models and very early taxidermy that usually has like a handful of people in it. And it is just the best. And so I have seen so many small museums, outsider art projects, visionary art projects get destroyed, fall into ruin, get closed down because they can't get enough people through the doors at the exact same time that you've got these places, Barcelona, Venice, Tulum, that are just like drowning in people. And even within those cities, they're usually in like 3 places kind of, And so for me, these things go hand in hand because it's not just about sort of like tourism bad. I don't think that's true. I think tourism is an incredibly powerful force. I think you can do enormous amounts of good, but you have to figure out how to effectively disperse it. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, the ultimate thing. And I feel like one of the things that where Atlas Obscura came out of was travel media just has this very intense pattern of dogpiling. You know what I mean? Someone writes an article about Tulum. It's the hot new place. Someone else writes an article about Tulum. Everyone does their glossy spread, whatever. And by the time this has gone through, all of the channels and the social media and, people show up downstream of that media, and the place is just absolutely hammered. You know what I mean? And stuff's expensive. Residents are upset. The quality of everyone's life and the experience of the tourists has been diminished. So that's not good. That's like a lose-lose.
Exactly.
And like there are, it's not even residents versus travelers, because when that happens, the travel experience genuinely gets hugely degraded.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for me, it's just a huge question of how do you kind of mythologize new places, new cities, new individual locations within a city, different countries? How do you just keep reminding people that travel can be a very anxious experience? People don't have a lot of vacation time. They want to do it right. They're spending a lot of money. And all that anxiety really drives people towards sort of checking the boxes, right? And how do you give people permission to check different boxes? You know what I mean? To just go at a different time of year, maybe stay a little longer in one place so you can explore the outskirts or farther away more. It's okay if you don't see every kind of famous site and you do some other stuff. So I don't know how to sort of giving tourists that confidence and that permission structure to do dispersal, making new stories so that there's just new stuff to get excited about. And then if those things get crowded, making new stories, like that feels like it should be the work of travel media. And I don't know that it always is. And so I that's like an important for me. Yeah. I think about those things as distinctly tied, over tourism and under tourism. You've got this powerful tool. Use it to do good.
The world is enormous. There are so many different places we could be visiting.
Yeah.
But
endless, really endless.
Absolutely endless. Like there's enough space in the world for us all because we all inhabit the world. We
Yeah.
just need to try and find. I mean, your work and my work are just coming at the same problem from different angles. So, trying to get people to be thoughtful about where they're going. And for example, why are they standing in a 3-hour queue? Is this a place they really want to see? Or is it just the FOMO of everyone will expect me that I've, been to Paris? I must go to the Eiffel Tower, but do you? Do you must go there? Like,
yeah.
Let's see, what other things we could be doing. Maybe we don't even really go to Paris. There's a whole country and, the rest of France is not full. And there's so many other experiences you could be having. And you could have 2 weeks in a beautiful little village in France and be fulfilled entirely from that.
You would be so much happier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so much happier.
Right. It would be way more fun.
But people don't go to places that they don't know anything about, that they don't have any hook to hang a vision, a dream, a plan on,
Good point. So personally, I love seeing all the other stuff, the non-mainstream stuff. But as Dylan points out, we in the media need to continue to educate and persuade travellers that they're not missing out by doing this, but actually getting a better experience. So my next guest is Jamie Burr, who is a marketer with a special interest in responsible tourism. So obviously he has thought a lot about overtourism as well.
It's been this issue that's kind of been simmering over the last, I'd say, couple of decades, really. Tourism has been something that's not often been managed or managed that well. And now, it's sort of come to this tipping point where you see cases like Barcelona, Bali, Amsterdam, all the kind of poster children of overtourism starting to bite back, with protests and things like locals and residents in Barcelona marching down the streets saying tourists go home and squirting people with water pistols, which I'd actually love to have been part of that. either in the protest or sat down in one of the restaurants, just soaking up the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Observing, yes. Yeah. Overtourism is a really, really, I spoke about it actually in this trends article we wrote recently with Better Routes Collective about how I'm kind of predicting that hopefully it's going to trigger a kind of response because, the average tourist, the average traveler doesn't really have that much awareness, I think, of sustainable travel. I mean, everything that it encapsulates. When people think of sustainable travel, they think, planting trees or all the ecological, environmental stuff. But now with overtourism sort of coming to a head, I think people are starting to become more aware of the social impact, how poorly managed tourism is affecting local areas, things like Airbnb, for example, pushing up rental costs and things like that. It's obviously a bad thing over tourism, but I think it's also a good thing that these stories are now coming, into the top story feeds in my BBC News app, for example, like tourism protests in Barcelona. That's suddenly going to get, of course, the awareness up if people like the BBC are talking about it or other news organizations, just putting it into people's consciousness, because I think that's a huge challenge that we've got in sustainable tourism is when I speak about sustainable tourism issues on LinkedIn, you get lots of engagement and things saying, this is brilliant. I'm 100% behind you, Jamie. But it's kind of like a vicar preaching to the choir. Yes. All of those people commenting and engaging already know those things, and it's how do we communicate those things to the masses and make actual real change, transform those attitudes and intentions into real action and behavior. You always see people talking about that attitude behavior gap in tourism, and it's a tricky one because compared to different industries, finance or just as like buying a t-shirt, buying a organic t-shirt or a second-hand t-shirt is a lot easier than doing a responsible holiday because, you might have been environmentally friendly throughout your year. You might have eaten more plant-based food, for example, or done more recycling. But at the end of the year, you think, God, haven't I behaved well? Haven't I worked so hard? I deserve this holiday. And I'm just going to throw the gloves off and act like a hedonistic teenager, like it's the last days of Rome or something.
And I deserve to go to Barcelona or Venice or wherever that's already busy because I've always wanted to go there. So why should I miss out?
Exactly. The average person doesn't care about politics, and I don't think the average person cares about sustainable tourism. But we need to make sustainable tourism something that people want to do and think of it as less of a burden, like make these train travel journeys across Europe, these amazing things, backpacking. I've seen an article published by One Planet Journeys today speaking about how backpacking is this amazing immersive way to travel and
Nice.
experience local cultures and connect with people, because that's the thing that, if you dig down deep into what people really want, people don't want tours. They don't want a hotel stay. If you dig deeper and deeper from the tour level to what the tour offers, like local foods and things like that, the thing that you get to in the end, I think, is memories and these great stories that you can share with friends and family and tell your grandkids.
I so agree. And these great stories and memories happen much more frequently when you're, say, traveling slowly or away from the main sites. And I suspect you don't really remember many stories about waiting in a 4-hour queue of tourists, or if you do, they're not positive ones. Now, my final guest today is Christou from the End of Tourism podcast. Now, we started off chatting about digital nomads, people who move from their home country to work online from elsewhere, somewhere usually cheaper than their home country. Chris has been living in Oaxaca in Mexico for many years. And so we then chatted about overtourism in general, starting with some discussions that Chris has had in Oaxaca about this.
When people ask me here, what do we do? I say, well, we're pretty confident that in a place like Oaxaca, the government is not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And even anyone who attempts to become a part of the government will fail miserably in their attempts to limit these things. I mean, even in Barcelona, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but the current mayor, who's been mayor since 2015, she won the ticket based on limiting the tourism industry and regulating the tourism industry, but they've had very little success in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a place like Oaxaca, we know that that's impossible.
Sure.
And in a place like Oaxaca, there is this long, long history of grassroots movements. And so I tell people, well, first of all, you need to organize, and it's probably best to start with forums, in-person forums on a neighborhood level, right? With the people in your neighborhood. Because maybe 10, 20 years ago, when these movements were much stronger, that you could do this and you could perhaps find a way of coming to the consequences in a clear light and proceeding accordingly. But now, because of over-tourism or tourism in general, gentrification, etc., half the neighborhood is renting Airbnbs.
Yeah, right.
Half the neighborhood did not grow up in that neighborhood, right? Or they're foreigners, which is, to say international, foreigners. And so, it's been really great in the last month. I've had multiple people come to me from, kind of disparate parts of the city, politically and otherwise, and say, so we're planning to do this. We're planning to put together a forum in a few different instances in neighborhoods. So on a small geographical scale. And then separately, for example, in the art community.
Yeah.
So people who don't necessarily live together in the same neighborhood, but who share these same values, more or less, or lifestyles, seeing what's happened and, want to try to find a way to contend with this in a good way.
Yeah.
And together, right? I mean, the internet and social media has created this way of separating ourselves or being separated by virtue of our screens in a way that, well, if someone uploads like a meme or a commentary about the issue, then okay, they've done their job, right? And if you agree with the commentary, then you just hit the like and your work is done, right? And that's all it is, right? And so, it also comes down to these things that to some degree seem to have nothing to do with the tourists that's arrived, but that are actively undermining our capacity to organize on a communal scale, whether it be a community in the sense of the neighborhood or a particular lifestyle or craft in terms of community. So, the art community, for example.
Art community or something, yeah. And from there, what happens next?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that what's beautiful about having the possibility of having these forums is that whether it's a particular neighborhood or a particular craft or community, that the answers or solutions, if we want to call them that, might be very different from neighborhood to neighborhood, from community to community. And this reminds us of the beauty of diversity within a place. And so when I started The End of Tourism, is obviously a very provocative title, controversial perhaps. But, what is the end of tourism? It wasn't just like, oh, well, it's like, yeah, like let's destroy the industry and everyone has to stay home, right? And it's like, no, I never gave a particular definition. I gave perhaps options, in the sense of, well, maybe the end of tourism begins to look something like old time hospitality, right? Maybe the capacity for people to arrive in a place, or the capacity for people to invite others to a place, is based exactly on that. An invitation that doesn't come from the Ministry of Tourism, that doesn't come from the tourist industry or an agency, but comes from individuals living in, or perhaps the community at large.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds to me like what you're kind of talking about is the opposite of mass tourism, and the idea that you go somewhere because you already have some connections or feel connected or have found a friend, or, it's not, you don't just go to tick off a list, which is of course my least favorite kind of tourism. And you put the horse before the cart instead of the other way around, and have some connections and experiences. And that's why you go somewhere, because you already have this background, not just, let's go here and let's go to 10 cities in 3 weeks or whatever. Perhaps I've oversimplified, but.
No, I love that. I ask people this from time to time, and I say, like, what if you could only travel based on an invitation? And not just from your Airbnb host, right? But that there would be, in your manner of proceeding, not just in the place, but before, like your approach to the trip itself, before you ever leave, that this might very well be about courting relationship, building friendships, across borders, and solidarity as well with the issues that people are contending with in these other places. Because at the end of the day, you might very well find that the issues that they're facing are not that different from the ones you're facing at home, and might very well be part and parcel of the reasons for which you so dearly want to leave a place.
We got quite philosophical there, but it is really interesting to speculate how tourism might be very different in the future, and especially if it resolves some of the issues that we're facing now, for example, with overtourism. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to episode 333 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. As always, a really big thank you to my guests. We started off chatting with Dylan Turris from Atlas Obscura, and you can find the podcast Atlas Obscura in all your podcast apps, or at atlasobscura.com/podcast. I then chatted with Jamie Burr, and you can find out all about Jamie and his work in marketing responsible tourism at jamieburr.com. And finally, rounded it off with a chat with Christou from the End of Tourism podcast. And similarly, you can find that podcast on all your apps, or go to theendofTourism.com. Don't forget to come along and chat in our groups as well. You can find either the Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers, either through the show notes or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms. And our Substack newsletter, Thoughtful Travellers, is coming out a lot more regularly now, so hop over to thoughtfultravel.substack.com to sign up if you haven't. You can also, if you want to support the podcast in any way, sign up for a paid subscription there at $5 a month if you want to show some financial appreciation for the work of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, and thank you to those who have. All of those links and more are in the show notes, and for this episode you can find them at notaballerina.com/333. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.